It was the autumn of 1913 when the winds swept across the wide, endless plains of Oklahoma. Golden fields swayed under the sunset, whispering secrets of both life and loss. In a small wooden farmhouse stood the Miller family. Thomas, the father, a hard-working man with rough hands and tired eyes. Clara, his wife, gentle and devoted, whose voice could calm even the stormiest night. And their two children, Eli, 10, and Grace, 7, both full of laughter that seemed to breathe life into the old house. That day, Thomas stood in the doorway, staring at the horizon. He'd harvested every last sheaf of wheat, knowing this might be the final crop. The drought had been cruel that year. The soil had turned to dust, and debts had grown heavier than the sky before a storm. Still, Clara smiled as she prepared supper: cornbread, stew, and the last jar of blackberry preserves. "We'll be fine, Tom," she said softly. "We always find a way." He nodded, though his heart was heavy. He didn't know that this night, the night of their last supper, would become a mystery whispered for generations. As dusk settled, a stranger appeared at their doorstep. He was a tall man in a dark coat, with eyes like fading embers and a quiet voice that carried both sadness and grace. "Evenin', folks," he said, tipping his hat. "My horse went lame down the road. Might I trouble you for a meal?" Clara, ever kind, welcomed him in without hesitation. "You're just in time for supper," she said warmly. Thomas hesitated but relented. In those times, you didn't turn away a traveler, no matter how mysterious he seemed. As they sat around the old oak table, the lamp flickered and the room filled with the scent of warm bread and stew. The stranger thanked them and bowed his head in prayer before eating. His words were strange but comforting, a blessing for peace, no matter what storms may come. Eli whispered to his sister later, "Do you think he's an angel or a ghost?" Grace giggled. "Maybe both." After dinner, the stranger began to tell stories, tales of towns swallowed by dust, of people who vanished in storms but were remembered in spirit. His voice carried an old wisdom, the kind that made time itself slow down. Thomas listened quietly, his hand wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. Clara felt a strange chill, though the fire burned bright. The children, sleepy-eyed, leaned against her shoulder. "You folks have good hearts," the stranger said finally. "You hold on to hope, even when it hurts." "That's rare." Thomas smiled faintly. "Hope's all we've got left," the man nodded. "Then you've already found what most men spend a lifetime searching for." Before heading to bed, Clara offered the stranger a place to sleep in the barn. He thanked her, tipping his hat again. But when Thomas went to check the barn at dawn, there was no one there, only footprints leading to the wheat field, and then nothing. The next morning, the sky over the plains turned a deep crimson, a strange, almost holy light that spread across the horizon. The townsfolk of nearby Harlow Creek said later they'd never seen anything like it. Thomas stood outside, shading his eyes. "It's the dust," he muttered, though his voice trembled. "The wind's stirring it up." But Clara felt something else, a stillness, like the land was holding its breath. Inside, the children were drawing at the kitchen table. Grace was sketching the stranger. "He had kind eyes," she said, "and he said we'd be remembered." Clara looked over her shoulder and froze. The drawing showed the man standing under a red sky, with wings faintly outlined behind him. That night, Thomas decided they would share one last family meal before heading to town in the morning. He didn't know that this supper would be spoken of for 100 years. The table was set with care, mismatched plates, a flickering oil lamp, and food that Clara had stretched from almost nothing: cornbread, a bit of salted pork, and potatoes roasted in the fire. She'd even opened their final jar of preserves, the one she'd been saving for Christmas. As they sat down, Thomas raised his cup. "To family," he said, "and to better days." Eli smiled. "And to Ma's cooking." Everyone laughed, even Clara, who brushed a tear from her eye. Outside, the wind began to rise, rattling the shutters. The air carried a low hum, like distant thunder, though no storm had been forecast. The family bowed their heads for prayer. As Thomas spoke, the lamp flickered once, then twice, before steadying. For a brief moment, each of them felt something, a warmth, a peace that neither fear nor hunger could touch. After supper, the Millers gathered in the sitting room. Thomas played his old fiddle, Eli tried to whistle along, and Grace danced in circles until she grew dizzy with laughter. Even the walls seemed to come alive with warmth, the sound of life, the sound of hope refusing to die. Clara watched them, her heart swelling with love and sorrow. She thought of all they'd lost, the farm nearly gone, the debt piling high. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They had each other. Outside, the red glow still lingered in the sky, now dimming to purple. Somewhere far in the distance, a coyote howled. The old grandfather clock struck 9. Eli yawned. "Can we do this again tomorrow, Ma?" Clara smiled softly. "Of course, sweetheart. Tomorrow and every day after." But in her heart, she felt something she couldn't name. A quiet knowing that tomorrow might never come. Late that night, the wind howled through the plains like a ghostly song. Dust crept in through every crack, coating the floor in a fine red film. Thomas got up, checked the doors, and secured the windows. "Strangest weather I've seen," he muttered. When he looked out the window, he swore he saw a faint light moving through the wheat, like a lantern swaying back and forth. He blinked, and it vanished. Maybe it was the stranger. Maybe it was something else. He sat by the window until the clock struck midnight. The wind stopped suddenly, leaving a silence so deep it made his ears ring. And then, from the darkness outside, came a soft knock on the door. Thomas froze. He opened it slowly, but there was no one there. Only the wind carrying the faint smell of wildflowers and rain. The next morning, the Millers decided to write a letter to Thomas's brother in Kansas City. Clara dictated while Thomas wrote in his rough script, "If times get worse, we might head your way. The land here's gone quiet, but we're together, and that's what keeps us strong." When he finished, Clara signed her name and added a small note at the bottom. "Tell Ma we love her. And don't worry about us. The Lord provides." Thomas folded it neatly and set it on the table. "I'll send it tomorrow," he said. But the letter would never reach Kansas City. It would be found years later, untouched, sealed in its envelope, lying beside 5 empty chairs. That evening, as darkness fell, something strange happened. The air turned heavy, like the world itself was waiting. The children were already asleep, curled together under a quilt. Thomas sat by the fire, his face illuminated by flickering light. Clara whispered, "Do you think we'll be all right?" He took her hand. "We've always been all right," he said, "no matter what happens." Just then, a low hum filled the air, not thunder, not wind, but something else. The same sound the stranger's voice had carried the night he arrived. Outside, the barn door creaked open, though there was no wind. The lamp flames stretched tall, trembling. And from far across the plains came a voice, faint but clear, "Come home." Clara's eyes widened. Thomas stood, heart pounding. But when he looked outside, there was only the red horizon, glowing once more like embers in the dark. Sometime after midnight, a bright light swept across the land. Neighbors miles away would later say it looked like dawn, though the sun was nowhere near rising. Inside the Miller home, the clock struck 12. The wind rose again, gentle but strange. The dishes on the table rattled softly. The oil lamp went out, not with a flicker, but with purpose, as though someone had blown it gently. Then came silence. When the morning came, the house stood as it always had. Doors open, food still on the table, the chairs pulled back as though the family had just stood to greet someone. But there were no footprints leaving the house, only the faint scent of rain and the sound of the wind whispering through the wheat. The Millers were gone. Days passed before anyone from town came looking for the Millers. The mailman was the first to notice. He'd ridden up to deliver a letter from the bank, another warning about unpaid debt. But something about the place felt wrong. The front door hung slightly open, creaking in the wind. He called out, "Tom? Clara? Anybody home?" Silence. Only the hum of the planes and the faint squeak of the old weather vane turning above the barn. Inside, the table was still set. 4 plates, bits of food untouched, and a jar of preserves half empty. The air smelled faintly sweet, like berries and rain. On the counter sat the letter Thomas had written but never mailed. Its ink dry, the words still legible. He backed away slowly. The place didn't feel empty. It felt paused, as if time had decided to stop there. He left the house without looking back. By evening, word spread through Harlow Creek. The Millers are gone. Sheriff Wallace rode out the next morning with 6 men from town. They searched the property from dawn till dusk. The wheat fields stretched wide and quiet, the earth soft with dust but showing no footprints, not even animal tracks. They checked the barn, the tools hung neatly, the horse still in its stall, unfed but unharmed. Clara's shawl lay over a chair, and Grace's rag doll sat upright on her bed, smiling blankly toward the window. "What do you think happened?" one of the men whispered. The sheriff rubbed his chin. "People don't just vanish," he said, "but they ain't here neither." That night, as they rode back to town, a storm rolled over the plains. Lightning flashed across the horizon, illuminating the Miller farmhouse. Standing proud and still, like a memory refusing to fade. 3 days later, Reverend Samuel Owens claimed he had a dream. He saw the Miller family sitting at a long wooden table laughing and singing under a golden light. Behind them, the stranger from the road stood smiling, hands folded like a shepherd. When he told the townsfolk, some believed it was just his imagination, but others, especially the older farmers, crossed themselves and whispered that it was a sign. "They were taken," one old woman said. "Not gone, just taken." The preacher rode out to the farmhouse alone the next morning. Inside, he found the air warm, though no fire burned in the hearth. On the wall above the table, faint letters had appeared, carved as though by hand. "We are home." Years passed. The farmhouse fell into ruin, its windows shattered by storms, its roof sunken by time. Yet every spring the wheat around it grew taller and greener than anywhere else on the plains. Farmers said the soil there was different. Some said it was blessed. Others said cursed. Children dared each other to run through the Miller fields after sunset. They swore they heard laughter. A woman's voice humming an old hymn, a fiddle playing softly in the wind. And sometimes, if you listened close, you could hear a child's giggle carried on the breeze. The land, it seemed, refused to forget them. In 1938, a young historian named Eleanor Price from Tulsa came to Harlow Creek to document ghost stories of the old Dust Bowl era. She was skeptical, but curious, drawn by tales of the family who vanished after their last supper. When she reached the Miller farmhouse, she found only fragments, a broken plate, a child's hair ribbon, and a rusted locket half buried in the soil. Inside the locket was a small photo, Clara and her children smiling on the porch. That night, Eleanor stayed in town at the inn. She recorded her findings in her notebook. ending with a single line. Some stories don't end. They wait for the right person to listen. Before dawn, she woke suddenly to the smell of blackberries and wood smoke, and faintly, in the distance, the sound of a fiddle. Eleanor returned to the farmhouse the next morning, drawn by something she couldn't explain. While exploring what remained of the kitchen, she noticed a loose floorboard near the hearth. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, she found Clara Miller's diary. The entries were ordinary at first, cooking notes, the children's birthdays, lists of chores, but the final pages told a different story. A stranger came by. His words were kind, though his eyes held sorrow. He said we'd be remembered. He said the world beyond this one has room for those who never stop believing. Tonight, Tom says we'll eat together one last time. The wind is red again. Maybe it's a sign, if anyone finds this, know that love is stronger than loss. Eleanor closed the diary, trembling. For the first time, she felt the truth wasn't about where they went, but why. That evening, a strange red light once again stretched across the sky, just as it had in 1913. The townsfolk gathered outside, staring in awe. Many had never heard of the Millers, but old-timers whispered prayers under their breath. Out at the ruins of the Miller farm, the wind began to hum. The wheat swayed in perfect rhythm, like a choir of golden voices. And then, for just a heartbeat, people swore they saw them. Thomas, Clara, Eli, and Grace, standing in the doorway, smiling toward the plains. Then the light faded, and the house stood empty once more. But the next morning, when the sun rose, the wheat field shimmered silver in the dew, shaped impossibly like the outline of four joined hands. Eleanor spent years studying what she found. Her conclusion was simple but profound. The Millers never truly disappeared. They transcended. In her final report, she wrote, "Their vanishing was not tragedy, but mercy." When the earth could no longer hold their faith, heaven took them home. She later learned that on the very night they vanished, several families in nearby counties claimed to see a light rising from the plains, like a lantern ascending into the stars. One farmer even said he heard singing carried on the wind. "We'll meet again, where wheat never dies." Half a century later, during a restoration of the old post office, a dusty envelope was found behind a shelf. It was the Miller's letter, the one Thomas had written to his brother. By chance, it reached the hands of Samuel Miller, Jr., Thomas's great-nephew, who was now a middle-aged man living in Missouri. When he read the letter, his eyes filled with tears. "If times get worse, we might head your way. But we're together, and that's what keeps us strong." He decided to visit the old farm. When he arrived, he found only open land and tall wheat glowing under the sunset. He knelt, whispered a prayer, and left the letter there, as if returning it home. The wind picked up gently, carrying the paper into the field, where it vanished among the gold. Today, more than a century later, no one knows exactly what happened to the Miller family. Historians call it the Oklahoma vanishing. Believers call it the ascension of faith. But the land still remembers. Each spring, the wheat grows higher, greener, stronger, untouched by drought or decay. And if you stand there at sunset, you might feel it. A hush, a warmth, a presence that feels like love itself. Some say the stranger was an angel. Others believe he was death, arriving in kindness. But maybe, just maybe, he was a reminder that the end of one story is only the beginning of another. Because what truly vanishes never really leaves. It simply moves beyond sight, carried by hope, faith, and love that time cannot erase.